With COVID-19 forcing many companies to have their employees work from home, there's been a disturbing increase in exposure to cybercrime. No surprise, as most homes are not equipped with a firewall. Recently, AAIS Personal Lines product manager, Linda Jancic, hosted a terrific panel to discuss the impact of cybercrime, the online home invasion. Sounds ominous. Linda?
2020 has been a different and difficult year for families, professionals, and employees as the world shelters in place to thwart the spread of COVID-19. With millions juggling work, education, and family care from home, dangerous cybersecurity incidents are on the rise. Personal and work computers and mobile devices are being targeted by hackers, causing expensive, painful, and time-consuming cyber threats and exposures during an already stressful time. Today, we'll be discussing the rise of cyber threats, future predictions, and how carriers can protect their customers from emerging cyber threats. I am thrilled to welcome to our panel 3 experts with unique perspectives on cybercrime. First, we have Eric Warboss, Vice President of Business Development, responsible for leading the U.S. Insurance and Emerging Markets Business Development teams at CyberScout. Next, we have Jeff Crone, Vice President and Solutions Leader for Berkeley Re Solutions. Jeff is responsible for the product leadership, development, and innovation around turnkey offerings. And last but not least, we welcome Chris Ellis, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Berkeley Re Solutions. Chris has leadership role in product development, innovation, marketing, and business. Thank you for joining us. So Eric, let's start with you. CyberScout is on the ground, providing support for victims of fraud and cybercrime. What trends are you seeing as a result of the pandemic?
Well, thank you, Linda. Surprisingly, we haven't seen the development of really a lot of new COVID-specific email phishing and phone scams in our resolution center. We have, however, seen a really dramatic increase in unemployment fraud in our resolution center, and this fraud appears to be primarily driven by crime syndicates like those in Nigeria. And essentially, these types of syndicates have massive amounts of data, personally identifiable information on hand at all times. And when a crisis strikes, they like to leverage this crisis if they can. And unfortunately, COVID has compromised the livelihood of a lot of people in the country. So there was already a real strain on the unemployment resources within each state, and that made fraud easier to commit in the first place. And of course, you also had an increasingly lucrative incentive in place, given the expansion of unemployment through the CARES Act. And so this has created sort of a perfect storm for this type of fraud. Examples from a recent report indicate that Mississippi is estimated to have paid out at least $76 million in improper payments so far. And Washington State has paid out, the estimates at least suggest it's paid out a whopping $650 million improperly. Now, that's not all going to crime syndicates in Nigeria, but a lot of that money is the result of is fraud losses. And so we're seeing a real dramatic increase directly tied to COVID.
Oh, thank you. Eric, so also there have been many instances of data breaches in the news, and offers of credit monitoring are very common now. So when a data breach does occur, it seems people may have become inured to ID theft. Is that still a compelling coverage?
Well, I believe it is still a very compelling coverage, precisely because there's so many types of fraud that aren't alertable via credit monitoring. The unemployment fraud that we were just discussing isn't alertable via credit monitoring alone. Neither are payday loan scams, nor are say, fraudulent tax returns, unauthorized bank withdrawals, et cetera. Not to mention the fact that it's really more convenient to maintain identity fraud coverage through your insurance provider, because so much of your financial risk transfers, it's already there, and because these coverages are commonly very low priced.
Jeff, let's move to you. What about the changing environment for people that are now suddenly working from home? Has the risk changed for those people?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I think it's a great question. Overall, I think with people being home and overall screen time is up significantly, we're all more at risk. We're online more, we're seeking content to kind of break up the monotony, and inevitably we're going to click more links for videos, articles, whatever it may be. The overall risk there hasn't changed necessarily, but the volume is magnified on both ends, right? So more scams are potentially out in that world, and also more screen time. So all of us need to be a little bit extra careful and think twice before clicking on the various kind of articles and content that we're seeking online. On the other hand, I think it's a little bit of a compounded effect where you have people using their corporate computer at home, and you also have people using their personal computer for work. So ideally, these corporate computers have more monitoring, more security, more protection. And then anyone using their personal computer is taking those extra measures to be safe and protect the data that's coming along with their business environment. So again, the risk has increased. And while we can only control so much, we have to kind of think back and rely more so on our own best judgment and best practices, because some of it's a volume-based increase rather than, as Eric has kind of indicated, a whole new level of risks in the new world.
Thank you. Chris, let's hear from you. Are computer viruses still a major concern, or are they relatively under control now?
Super good question. And hello, Linda. Yeah, they definitely are. I would characterize it as kind of big nets and small nets. So if you think about the big nets, right, we've heard of things, WannaCry, Petya, some other stuff like that. Haven't heard of one lately in the news, but we all suspect that that's just around the corner. In that big net world, what the guys are trying to do, the bad actors are trying to do is find gaps in security. Like a great example is Windows 7 is no longer supported. Well, there's a lot of businesses out there that, haven't upgraded from either expenses or what have you. So there's known gaps there, right? Even when current large population user type software, the bad guys are still trying to find those security threats. So I would call that the big nets, right? When they happen, they can impact many, many, many people, hundreds if not thousands or tens of thousands. And then the smaller nets. So this is where the bad actors are still working and spending time. So think of this as unique and proprietary software, bespoke software. So maybe things like accounting software, HR software, billing, things like that. So a smaller population has it. They may not have as much security. They will affect smaller groups, but still it's out there. And then your last part of that question was, is it relatively controlled? I would basically say 2 steps forward, a half step back. 5-10 years ago, it may have been 1 step forward, 1 step back, but I think we're doing better. There's new tech solutions out there. Many of the software companies are learning from experience how they have to take care of the security patches and stuff, and users are just more aware.
Thank you. So Eric mentioned that ID theft is a well-established risk that isn't going away. So Jeff, what are new threats facing individuals and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Eric is spot on there. ID theft is certainly not going away. Cyber continues to evolve, and there are all sorts of new threats that individuals and businesses are both facing. Ransomware continues to be problematic, both for businesses and individuals. You may not hear about it the same way in the news, with individuals dealing with ransomware, but it's out there. And over the past year, the average ransomware cost for individuals rose over 40%. So certainly real threats still facing the individual. Social engineering or any type of phishing is another big problem, and bad actors are getting more sophisticated with their scams and their techniques, making each one of these attempts more and more believable. So the only real way to stay safe is, frankly, to never give your personal information or money to someone who contacts you online or over the phone. But within social engineering even, there are specific scams that can be very costly and are also becoming more popular. And I'm referring specifically to romance schemes, the confidence of romance schemes that are out there. These online fake boyfriend, fake girlfriend scams are very costly. And some reports are averaging over $18,000 per attempt, or per scam, I should say. So again, it's about being extra careful. If these people, think logically about it, if they won't meet you in person, if they won't have a video chat with you, If they're always asking for money because something has happened, put your guard up, be a little bit extra careful. But lastly, and what I want to mention is cyberbullying. Cyberbullying isn't necessarily new, but it continues to be very problematic, and teens are seeing it at alarming rates. And it's only getting harder for parents to stay on top of the newest social media site, the newest platform of communication that their kids are using. And what we're hearing more from the feedback with our carriers and partners and things is that it's a super important topic for them and a really important coverage to work with and offer to provide not only the traditional insurance financial protections, but the education and kind of proactive measures that can come with a program.
Thanks, Jeff. Really powerful. And one thing I've been wondering as we're talking here today, are these risks equally distributed, or are certain demographics at higher risk?
Yeah, it's a great question, Linda. And, I personally tend to believe that most people feel, cyber risk is one of those things that can or won't happen to me, or at a minimum, it's this idea of, well, I'm not going to get scammed. That only happens to older folks. And it's a total misconception for the most part. I think it's true that those who are over 60 fall victim to these cyber crimes most often, and they lose the most money. But the overall breakdown that kind of comes underneath that in our demographic sets would probably surprise you. The second most victimized group is ages 30 to 39, followed by 40 to 49, and then the 50 to 59. So that gradual decline, I think, that we all would have expected going from 60 down, it isn't there necessarily. The money lost per victim is more in line with that age bracket, but I think that there's a certain argument that could be made that potentially older folks have more money to lose, and maybe they're not as concerned about transferring, X amount of dollars because it doesn't impact them financially as much. The real lesson here, is that the scammer, they may change their tricks depending on your age, bringing into play the grandparent schemes and things like that. But overall, they don't care how old you are. They just care about how much money you have and how quickly they can get it. So certainly nobody is immune to these types of scams.
Thank you. So Eric, have you found the same thing regarding demographics and risks?
Yeah, we have. I completely agree. If you were to ask a member of our resolution team the same question, they'd tell you that fraud risk doesn't discriminate. So our fraud remediation efforts are more or less evenly spread across age groups. What Jeff mentioned, and I agree with, is very true, is that what does vary a bit is the vector of attack. So an older demographic is perhaps more likely to fall for a romance scheme or an unsophisticated phishing attack, for example. But then if you expand it to other cyber risks, ransomware doesn't discriminate either. In fact, that's sort of the whole idea behind it, is that you can extort people at scale without having to focus on just, say, the wealthy that have something to be extorted. So most certainly, this risk extends, across all demographics and age groups.
Thank you. Here's a question I'd like to pose to each of you. What is the insurance industry's responsibility with respect to identity theft and cyber risks? Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure. As an industry, I think our goal is to stay current with all risks, right? And work to provide meaningful protections behind them. I think as we talk about identity theft and cyber, in particular, the commercial cyberspace has grown tremendously just over the past 10 years. When you look at the personal cyber market, I think, it's still in the early stages, a few years in, but it's a great example of how the insurance industry responded to perils that were out there and kind of looming in an effort to get ahead of what could be coming and still protect their insurance.
Thank you. Yes, same question.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. I think, if for the audience of carriers and reinsurers, our job is to ensure we understand what the risks are and try to help the ultimate insured solve those, whether it be risk management or it be insurance coverages or it be education. What I think I see a little bit, and probably a lot of the audience will be smiling when I say this, is, too often I think we get bogged down with some IT. We've got legacy systems, and it tends to shorten the amount of items that can go into product development and move things ahead. We've got some insurtechs out there that can move sometimes quicker than some carriers because of new fancy fresh systems and things like that. So I think that, we've got to try to work on that. The other thing I would say is that, carriers can utilize reinsurance relationships to help move product quicker into the marketplace. So rather than have to try to find resources internally to create the solutions and do the right research, there's partners out there that can help.
Great. Thank you. And Eric, same question for you.
Yeah, I think insurance carriers and the industry in general has an opportunity and a really responsibility to be very forthright with the coverages that they're offering. Don't bury these coverages on the last page of a homeowner's policy declaration. Ensure that the services are available to support the policyholder. If you think about it, a victim of identity theft doesn't just want reimbursement, they want the problem fixed and their credit restored. And similarly, with new coverages, victims of ransomware probably don't just want a new computer. They want, the 5 years of family photos back that are stored on that computer, et cetera. So it's really, I think, incumbent on carriers to make sure policyholders are aware of the coverages that they have available and the corresponding services that can help them actually recover from these crimes and these risks when they happen.
Great, thank you. So, based on this question and those answers, Chris, what has Berkeley Re done in this area?
Yeah, so I think what we've done is we actually, as a reinsurer, so we help put our carrier partners in the business of cyber. We develop robust forms, the rates, the rules, the underwriting guidelines, the intellectual work to help put those carriers in that business. We take all or most of the risk for the carriers who either don't have the expertise, they don't have comfort. I think there's a lot of carriers right now that are out there that, for a host of really good reasons, are pretty spooked about cyber. What is it going to look like from an aggregation perspective, and what is that going to do to their balance sheet? So from our perspective, specific to cyber, that's what we do. We help put the carriers in the business quickly and efficiently.
Thank you. Eric, what is the latest then from CyberScout?
Well, the latest and really our legacy approach and goal and responsibility is to, really in the most basic sense, support the policyholder, take a leading role in helping the policyholder manage through what's usually a very personal crisis. I, unfortunately, as an example, have had both a home burglarized and my identity stolen and actively used to open new lines of credit. And I can tell you firsthand that those two seemingly very different experiences actually felt very much the same emotionally. That's because ID theft and cyber crimes are very personal. And so simply cutting a check for losses isn't enough. And what a policyholder also wants and needs is support and expertise with respect to recovering from extortion, harassment, or fraud.
Thank you. Final question for each of you. Long term, what do you see as the evolving threats the industry will be forced to confront? Jeff, let's start with you.
Yeah, I don't want to call it an evolving threat necessarily, but I think one challenge the industry's forced to face with, or is maybe on the verge of being forced to face with, as a whole, with, especially with these cyber risks that we're discussing today, is the adoption, or maybe more so the utilization of services. There are a lot of great risk management tools, there are a lot of great partners and different things out there, but I think the proactive adoption of insureds is slow. If we can bridge that gap of education and utilization and move it to the forefront. So not when you're just dealing with the event that's already happened, but the steps in place to prevent it from happening. That utilization is a net win for everyone. And to a certain extent, I think that there's a behavioral change needed to say, I need to do this first to protect myself and not wait for the insurance to come in after the fact.
Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so what do I see as an evolving issue? I think it's probably the Internet of Things. There's a ton of good answers here, but Internet of Things is one that, I think many of us are trying to focus on. Think of your own house. They're just coming out. I think the numbers, the spending in 2020 estimated this year will be $1.29 trillion on Internet of Things. Spending on smart home systems, the Nests, not to pick any brands, but the Nests and the other things, the alarm security systems and what have you, estimated to be 115 billion. And those numbers, obviously, depending on where you go and what stats you see, is going up and up. So how do we as an industry solve for that? You know, when you think about it from a personal line perspective, what does cyber do? How does it interact with that? And then you think the ag business, for anybody that's in the ag side of things, this year's spending was about 14.5 billion, connecting equipment, automated processing, things like that. So I think we need to be looking at how do we approach that equipment. Some of it's throwaway pricing. So does insurance have a role in there? Does it not? So I think that's something we got to keep our eye on.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Eric, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Linda. So I want to just add to what Jeff mentioned. If you think about either commercial lines or personal lines, ultimately it's the end user, it's the employee at Equifax that didn't install a patch that's the weak link, or it's the homeowner that's clicking around irresponsibly that leads to a ransomware event. So involving policyholders and helping them to become part of the solution proactively is super important. To answer your question, though, a little bit differently, I see advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning as really the primary driver of very refined cyber attacks through the internet in the future. If you take phishing attacks as an example, the most successful today are spear phishing attacks, and that is to say fake email attacks that are really specifically crafted to appeal to an individual victim. And they do that by using information the victim wouldn't assume is otherwise available to a criminal. And they do that in order to hammer her into this sort of false sense of security, a sense that the email and the actions of the sender and what the sender is requesting are all legitimate. And spear phishing attacks are super effective, but they're also labor intensive today, so they don't happen at scale. Instead, you tend to see simple, traditional phishing attacks, which are kind of generic and sloppy. So you might receive an email from a bank that you don't even bank with requesting a password reset, and it's an obvious giveaway. To get to the point, in the future, I foresee artificial intelligence is going to enable vast amounts of this digitized information, all available on the internet publicly, to be scraped and processed, and then paired with stolen, personally identifiable information that's not public and breached email addresses to create really high quality spear phishing attacks at a very large scale. And one other threat I think is interesting with respect to new types of fraud, as well as extortion and harassment risks, is this really mind-boggling improvements in deepfake voice and video technology, meaning existing audio and images or videos that are placed with someone else's likeness. And that's done to create entirely new vectors of attack. So deepfake audio, as an example, uses a person's own voice patterns or their mannerisms, for example, mine, to create fraudulent audio person speaking. And in the same way, deepfake video paired with audio creates incredibly compelling, totally fake video representations of somebody that can be used in all manner of ways, leading to more effective fraud for sure, but also reputational damage and extortion.
Wow. Well, thank you, Eric, Jeff, and Chris. I'm happy to be back live with our panel to answer some of your questions. As a reminder, you can submit a question to our panel using the form just below the screen. So we encourage you to fire away. So as you think about your questions, let me start with this one. It's very positive news that insurance companies are finding ways to enter the field, assist consumers with these emerging perils for the public good. One of you mentioned that personal coverage is more in its infancy than commercial. So do you see major differences between the two, or is it just a matter of scale?
Yeah, hi, Linda. I'll take this one, and thanks for the question. I think it's a scenario where it's a little bit same and different, right? So personal lines cyber is definitely still early days, and time will tell on how things develop. But from what we can see today, I would say that there is a shared exposure in regard to the type of risk. And you can see that in the commercial and personal lines policies where they share some similar coverages. So think about extortion and ransomware or system compromise coverage as an example. commercial cyber gets a lot of the headline news. You hear about hospitals or school districts, cities being, extorted and experiencing a ransomware attempt. You're not necessarily ever going to hear about your neighbor down the street going through the same thing, but it is happening. So to an extent, yes, it's definitely a matter of scale, where the bigger and badder, the more press worthy it's going to be. But I find, if you give the bad actors enough time, that they're going to find a way to exploit something. And the more time we have on our end to gather the data and make it available, the more real it will become to policyholders. With cyber and kind of with anything else, it's better to be prepared up front with a personal cyber policy than just to wait until you need it, or it's kind of fully developed and you're somewhat behind.
Yeah, Linda, I would just add to that, that what we've seen several carriers offering high net worth personal cyber light coverages for several years now. And so in that sense, personal cyber insurance is sort of following the arc of commercial cyber, which itself started off with really large companies and is now available to companies of all sizes. And because you've got these really innovative coverages like those offered in Berkeley Re's form, now every policyholder can have access to these coverages that have otherwise been sort of reserved for high net worth at really affordable prices.
Yeah, and Linda, I would just add one quick thing. It's good to see you again. So you talk about personal versus commercial. The other thing for probably a big chunk of the audience might be farm owners. So I think we're seeing reinsurers, CyberScout, others like us trying to solve for what do we do with the farm owners. You heard in the session there a little bit about IoT as it relates to automated equipment. So I would say commercial is a little bit ahead. The personal lines area is catching up. And then farm owners, while there's some products there, I think the market is looking at how do we really address cyber specific to those farm exposures, right? Ag kind of falls into commercial, but farm owners, many of them have a little bit of both. So we're trying to solve for that.
Great, thank you. Here's one. Helping people before claim is important. What are we seeing from a claims trend since COVID came into play? You want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that first. So, the goal of CyberScout is to keep the claim from becoming necessary in the first place. So, without a doubt, there are a lot more, call it interventions or remediation within the claims. I mentioned earlier that we serviced over, in the presentation, that we serviced over 1,000 policyholders who had fraudulent unemployment claims filed in their names. And to my knowledge, none of those resulted in an actual insurance claim because we were able to remediate it. Stephanie, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Glenda, as well. So I think, most of us have been watching the news during COVID, and it's been kind of unbelievable. Close to home, I've had my parents who are in their late 70s have been hit twice by different scams. Microsoft reported that during COVID, 20,000 to 30,000 a day of phishing and social engineering scams have been happening. And some of that related to people are working at home, obviously. So we're seeing a trend in that where, I'm not going to say we're careless, but if many of us probably have our laptops from work, right? And it comes with security and it's baked in, but we're still accessing our, maybe not a VPN, but we're just accessing our router at home. But many people don't do that. Many people are just using their own laptop. And so some are a little bit less vigilant about taking care of things like current patches or proper security. Password 123 might be the router. So I would say that's kind of what we're seeing.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is also something that we hear a lot about with everyone spending more time on social media. So are we seeing any exposures directly related to social media platforms?
Yeah, I'll take this one, and great question. So the short answer is yes, we see a lot of exposure coming from social media platforms. But, to dive in a little bit deeper to that, we see exposure from social media platforms on multiple fronts. Social media can be a great way to transmit malware. You're clicking links, you're clicking videos, etc. I think we can all attest to the fact we've seen someone say that their Facebook was hacked and don't accept any requests from me. Social media is an enabler. And your life is on display. And for the most part, people are giving unlimited access to total strangers through their social media, be that Twitter opinions or Instagram and Facebook pictures. This access is allowing for more sophisticated, more targeted, and more impactful spear phishing, which can lead to a variety of scams. Things we touched on in this session, between the confidence and romance schemes, the grandparent schemes, all these different things where the bad actor just knows a little bit more about you. They can use that to their advantage. And, lastly, with social media, and one of the, kind of hot topics again is cyberbullying, right? Social media is the landing spot for cyberbullying, and kids are unable to go home and turn it off. The classroom bully unfortunately follows you online as well now. So I think certainly social media is a direct spot of exposure, but it's exposure on multiple different fronts.
Thank you. So this will keep you up at night, I guess, but how do you predict cybercrime changing the next couple of years with automation?
I'll take a stab at that and then pass it off to Chris and Jeff. I mentioned in our discussion that I'm convinced cybercrime is going to become way more sophisticated, more targeted, and at greater scale as a result of artificial intelligence. That said, I'd point out that it's that same artificial intelligence that will really enable this expansion of fraud, harassment, and extortion risk. It's also going to be checked by it, meaning AI tools will also be deployed and used to help protect us from, for example, artificial intelligence phishing attacks, or determining if a video has been manipulated, or audio. So it's I don't want to be too doom and gloom. There's a lot of technology that's being created today to help thwart these risks in the future as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Eric talked about the deep fake videos as an example. Kind of in the same light, I would say, if we just look at IoT, we talked a little bit about it in the session with Farm. In 2017 to 2019, IoT doubled. I probably quadrupled it with the stuff that's in my house. We all know that, we all see it. And if it doubles that fast, it's just more access points. So what's going to happen in 3 years and 5 years? Those numbers are estimated to be 10 times the amount of IoT. And what that does is it just gives the bad guys more access points into our system. And then you add on to it what Eric was referring to, and that is more sophistication, right? I think we all chuckle sometimes when through work or other means we get tested, or the company gives you, kind of this thing to go through and how to spot a phishing scheme. Well, a lot of times here in the past, there was misspellings. You could tell that they copied a logo. So think of that was what we had in the past. Now think that we're going to have trillions of devices, and now you've got deep fake video. So it goes from a deep fake video that sounds just like you, from a misspelling and obviously a copy and a paste. So IoT has got to be right up there in terms of what I'm thinking, because it just gives bad guys more access points.
So actually, that gave someone a thought. So we have a question that came in that is, have you seen an increase in home IoT hacking?
Well, we haven't seen an increase in it yet. I think to Chris's point, the writing seems to be on the wall. With the more access, the more conveniences you have through the internet, the more likely the conveniences are going to be used against you. Now, where I think the near-term threat is probably with respect to, because of all of these devices that Chris mentioned, hackers and potentially nation states marshaling them to conduct these distributed denial of service attacks, for example, meaning having hundreds of thousands of these devices call on a website simultaneously and overwhelming it as long as they do. You can shut down, city governments that way, and certainly large businesses. So there's a lot of, let's say, incentive in the criminal world to figure out ways to do that using these devices.
Great. Thank you. So another question that just came in. With rising number of telecommuting workers in the pandemic environment in the last few months, are there any statistics linking cybercrime specifically to this trend, resulting in negative impacts to businesses For example, theft of sensitive business information by cyber criminals. Who'd like to take that?
You know, I'll take an early shot on it. You know, I think it's early, right? When you think about what's going on, and I do think anecdotally that's absolutely correct. With more people work from home, the less secure things may or may not be. Probably couldn't rattle off too many good statistics for you. I think the risk is definitely present out there, but nothing hard and true, I think, from my end on the statistical side for what we've seen over the course of time so far with family cyber.
Yeah, and I would agree with Jeff. I mean, it's although it feels like we've been in this crisis for years, it's a relatively short period of time to see the trends yet with respect to that risk. I haven't seen any studies that point to it, but I'm quite confident that will change when we've come out of this and the data's in.
Thank you. So what do you suggest as the one thing we should start doing today to be more safe online?
Oh, so that's limiting it to one thing makes it difficult to answer. But my answer, interested to hear Chris and Jeff's, would be to use a password manager and enable different passwords for every website that you access. And the longer you can make them, the better. Passwords are key to all sorts of fraud. We were talking about social media risk earlier. Largely that risk is today still with people getting a hold of your password and credentials and accessing your social media accounts in order to, for example, solicit funds from your relatives. So if there's one thing I'd vote password protection.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab, and then Jeff, maybe you could add something. I think about my kids. I think about my parents, and it's training and education. So it's don't click on this link, change your passwords, the things that Eric's talking about. And I think we would do well by trying to find some fun ways to help. I know, I've done some programs before. Many of you probably have, as we talked about a few minutes ago, that weren't really that fun. It was a little boring. I could think of, my kids would stop in a heartbeat. So how can we find some tools to go at the core issues to stop the bad actors and make it kind of fun and have it be gamified a little bit would be something I think would be really valuable.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on all of that, and I agree completely with both Eric and Chris, I find a lot of it is simple behavioral things. Read the entire email, look for the spelling and grammatical issues. If it's too good to be true, if it seems a little fishy, then whatever that may be, stay away. Don't give your information to anyone. For some reason, people have this behavioral process where we're willing to share our information on the internet, but we would never give our information to a random person on the street. So, kind of employ those same behaviors. If you wouldn't give it to a stranger on the street, don't give it to a stranger on the internet. The simple things just to stay a little bit extra safe.
Great, thank you. Okay, boy, this one I'm going to take that this is one that they would like me to help answer. You talked about the industry's role in addressing these issues. What are you doing to help your members? And so I'm very glad someone asked this question, because part of AAIS's responsibility as a modern advisory organization is to monitor and be involved in emerging trends to assist our members. So as part of its venture partner program, AAIS searches for quality partners to bring unique skill sets, tools, talents, and potentially unique products to AAIS members. So we've partnered with Berkeley Re Solutions to bring personal, commercial, and farm cyber solutions to AAIS members. And we started with personal lines, and we will include commercial and farm options in short order. And Chris, is there anything you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, no question. Yeah, we are super honored and delighted. We work super close with CyberScout in the personal lines and the commercial space as well. So, for our part, we worked very close with AAIS on the coverage portion of this to ensure that the coverage could be reinsured, which is the key thing for many of you out there, right? You can have a coverage form, but cyber is one of those coverages that almost is exclusively reinsured in whole or certainly in part. So you need to find reinsurers that are willing to go with the coverages. Many of you guys know that, there's quite a few different coverage forms out there. So we worked close with AAIS on that. And in addition to the reinsurance that we provide, which is flexible, we do 100% or quota share, we work in concert with AAIS to help onboard. So while AAIS, Linda and her team and all the folks are helping onboard with the forms, the rates, the filings, us and CyberScout and we're working very closely to help with operational marketing, agent claims, risk management pieces. So together we're going to do the heavy lifting and help put folks into business a little bit quicker.
Great, thanks. So if anyone is interested in talking with someone from AAIS or Berkeley Solutions more, I encourage you to do so. Looks like we have one more question, unless more occur. And that's that we've been talking a lot about COVID. And so the question is, are there any other headline news type scams that are out there now?
Sure. Who wants to go first?
Take it, Jeff.
Yeah, so headline news, I don't know. I think it's really just a matter of time for the next headline. To me, COVID isn't the scam. It's the headline to hit someone with a traditional scam. So, you think of COVID, you think of the impact of it, unemployment, fear, information overload, and maybe even the desire to have all that information and stay up to date. So bad actors take advantage of that, and after COVID, it's going to be the next hot topic. So if that's hurricane, an election, a financial cycle, whatever is going to be in the news, there's a way to exploit that in some way. If it's a reward, if it's fear, if it's whatever, kind of insert that new current event, and the bad actors will find a way to use it.
Yeah, just a little, maybe not headline news, but just some insight. I mentioned in the presentation that unemployment fraud was really rampant. That was certainly in the headlines, and we experienced that in our resolution center. But I think interestingly, if you're a victim of unemployment fraud, you know about it because you're unemployed and you went to file. So you're already, not in the best place when now you're having to deal with this fraud. Well, what we've seen is many of the folks who we service for unemployment fraud are now having small business loans opened in their name using that same PII, right? Your social security number doesn't change. And so it just gets reused and used again. So now you've just dealt with unemployment fraud, you're unemployed, and now you've got to clean up, small business loan and other types of fraud.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit on to the end of that. My daughter, in fact, just recently had the unemployment fraud happen, and starting to hear that some of her friends are starting to wonder if the same thing has happened. So I couldn't agree with you more. And Jeff's point of, this is just the vehicle to go after folks. One thing that starting to see a little bit more, and this is coming from a 15-year-old doing school from home, is they're starting to see a little bit more action on some of their social media. They've had a couple of their different social media sites being shut down a little bit from time to time, and attributing that a little bit to some hackers going after the kids, et cetera. So that'd be about all I'd add.
Great. Well, that about does it. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank my panel once again for their time and insights. And so now, Ed, back to you to close out today's Pulse. Ed?
Well, thank you, Linda. And to all our hosts and expert guests, you are all thought-provoking, informative, and entertaining. And another big thank you to our sponsors. Your support is greatly appreciated. Again, if you missed any of our programs today, you'll be able to catch a Pulse replay starting tomorrow. And let us know what you thought of our broadcast. We'll be including a survey along with replay instructions. If you have any questions regarding any of the topics covered in the edition of Pulse, please contact your AAIS advisor. I hope you enjoyed your very first AAIS Pulse. Until next time.